In this lesson, we're going to look at how to configure Tomcat for wire level security. In other words, how to make Tomcat accept HTTPS connections. I'm going to start with a demo. As you can see, I have a browser opened, and up in the browser URL window, there's HTTPS crossed out. That's a caution from the browser. Localhost 8443. 8443 is the default port number that Tomcat uses for HTTPS. Now, the browser is very unhappy because my digital certificate is not signed by a legitimate certificate authority. This is called a self-signed certificate. We'll talk later about how I got it. So this is the certificate that Tomcat is providing to the browser when the browser does the peer authentication challenge. And the browser, rightly so, thinks this certificate is worthless. So I'm going to go into advanced, and I get some more caution from the browser, but in the end, I'm going to say, no, please go ahead anyway. And as you can see, the standard Tomcat welcome page pops up. So Tomcat is now up and running. It will accept HTTPS connections. It will also accept the old HTTP connections. So we haven't turned anything off. All we've done is turn something else on. So let me just type that in quickly for confirmation. So there's the HTTP connection, and we just looked at the HTTPS connection. Now let me step through what I did in order to make this configuration work. So I'm now in my Emacs editor. We're looking at the working file called config.tcat.txt. It's included in the working files. So let me begin with the most important step. We need a digital certificate so that Tomcat can send that down to any challenging client. There's a variety of tools that can be used to create such a certificate, and Core Java ships with one of these. It's called KeyTool. So the command I use is shown here. KeyTool, and then you see some flags. Generate key pair. The algorithm I'm using is RSA, and I want the resulting digital certificate stored in a file called tcat.keystore. Any name, by the way, would do. Now, what's going to follow is an interactive session. I'm not going to show you all of that, but the KeyTool utility is going to prompt me for various pieces of information, my name, my organization, the city in which I live, and so on. It's also going to ask for a password, which I give it. I'm using qubits as a password. And when the session is done, it just takes a minute or so to walk through the entire process. We're going to have a file called tcat.keystore, and that's going to contain the self-signed digital certificate. Now, the next step is to configure Tomcat. So Tomcat's main configuration file is contained in a subdirectory called conf, and the name of this file is server.xml, and right near the top, so maybe a quarter of the way down, you'll see this particular item, so this element, a connector element, commented out. So for example, the close comment up here to the right is actually at the very end. So the first thing I do is I uncomment this. We'll look at some of the elements or some of the attributes in just a second, and I add the two lines you see at the end. The keystore file is the file that I just created. You could put this file any place. I created a subdirectory under conf called certs, and I just copied the file there. And then I entered my keystore password. As noted earlier, that's qubits. Now let me walk through these attributes quickly. So the default port number is 8443. On a regular web server, for example, Apache 2 or Nginx, the standard port would be 443. And then you can see the particular protocol implementation that Tomcat uses. Max threads is the maximum number of connections supported. We could change that. We're enabling SSL. We want that. Using the HTTPS scheme, we're going to get encryption automatically. This line is particularly important. You can see here that client authentication is turned off. In other words, Tomcat expects the client to challenge it, but Tomcat is not going to challenge the client. This is standard in web servers that support websites. And the protocol is TLS. We've talked about that before. Here's my key store file with my self-signed and therefore worthless digital certificate. And here's the password for that key store file. Now, once I edit this and save it, I need to restart Tomcat if it's running because Tomcat reads the configuration information only on startup. And then you can perform a test, of course. So I used a browser to do this. You also could use curl. It's a bit quicker. But if you use curl, as shown here, you want to use the --insecure flag because, again, curl is going to recognize that the digital certificate is self-signed and hence worthless. The configuration is relatively straightforward. It would be very similar, by the way, for any production-grade web server. The most important thing is to have one or more digital certificates and to let the web server know where those are located. So at this point, Tomcat is ready for wire-level support of HTTPS, and what we need to do next is configure a web service so that it takes advantage of this wire-level support.